When speaking about addiction, Gabor Mate often asks us not to question why the addiction, but to question why the pain. The idea being that behind every substance, behind every behavioural pattern, is a wealth of pain that we're using said substances and said behavioural patterns to soothe. That's going to be a very important pillar of this episode. And with that being said, welcome back to Symbiotic Vibration, everybody, and welcome to A Survivor's Guide to Survival. If you haven't been here already, my name is Evan. I use my experience of having a brain tumour, of having brain surgery, and all of the trauma that encompassed from that experience into my life and how I've been dealing with that. And this includes many addiction periods, many addiction problems. I have developed this series so that I can try to help as many people as possible with regards to whatever it is that they're going through. And this is episode 12. You're more than welcome to go back and watch the rest of the episodes if you've just gotten here. And if you have just gotten here, please feel free to subscribe. This wonderful community is still in its blossoming phase, but we're nearing 500 now. The idea is to develop a network for people to communicate along their own journeys of suffering, whatever it is that they're going through, to have a place to feel seen, to have a place to feel safe. Something that I didn't really have while I was ill. I find myself, yet again, outdoors. The weather has been fantastic for the last couple of weeks in Ireland, but it has become quite overcast today. Of course, the day that I chose to come back and start doing some videos after a well-deserved break. So, I'm at a stream, as you might be able to see in the background, and I'm in a woods. I'm going to go and find some beautiful locations to video. Today we'll be speaking about addiction, we'll be breaking down what addiction is at its core. We'll be speaking about ancestral imprints onto our DNA. We'll be speaking about how you could deal with your own addiction problems and issues with regards to facing your own illness. And I will be drawing from my own experience from early childhood all the way to having a brain tumour and post-brain tumour. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to find you some beautiful monologues and beautiful scenes along the way. So I'll leave you with that. Enjoy. I'm being very much spoiled for choice today with regards to where it is that I want to engage in these scenes. This woods is so tranquil and beautiful. You can hear the stream flowing beside me, I'm sure. Not too many birds chirping right now, but you'll hear a few of those too. Got the bare feet out, quite grounded, sitting on a mossy tree stump. Very happy to do so. It has created quite a comfy environment for me. And here I will break down addiction to the best of my capabilities. I will do so in an abbreviated manner because if I was to truly go into addiction, this would take me about 100 episodes, which I probably will do at some point in time, but we'll focus on A Survivor's Guide to Survival for today. Meaning we'll focus on dealing with addiction while we're ill, while we're suffering, or dealing with addiction because we're dealing with addiction. But I will synopsize as much as possible. Addiction at its core, it is the compulsive use of a substance or a behavioural pattern, regardless of the consequences that it's having on our physical health, on our financial health, and on our relationships. It is a chronic dysfunction of our reward system. On a neurological level, our brain has been programmed to reward ourselves for survival. Meaning, when we eat food, we are rewarded. When we drink water, we are rewarded. When we exercise, we are rewarded. When we socialize, we are rewarded. All of these survival mechanisms, the reason why exercise feels so good is because we're programmed to hunt, we're programmed to forage, we're programmed to explore. And so naturally we are being rewarded for doing so. The same applies for food and water and socialization. As mammals, we are pack animals and socializing feels good. So we are rewarded. We need to work together. That's why symbiotic vibration exists. So subscribe. Addiction a chronic dysfunction of this reward system. So for a long, long time, our species has been using psychoactive chemicals, millions of years perhaps, most certainly documented hundreds of thousands of years. So addiction has been intimately connected to us for a long time. However, in today's modern society, we have become very creative and savvy with regards to addiction, with regards to chemicals, with regards to developments in technology, and with regards to the puppet masters that are trying to rule this world. And so now, in modern day, within the last couple of 100 years, we have implemented many chemicals. Alcohol has been around for a lot longer, but we have cocaine and we have heroin now, and we have gambling, and we have technology. When we use substances or behavior patterns like this, our brain, our reward system is receiving a massive influx of dopamine, most certainly from things like cocaine or nicotine or caffeine or alcohol, or using your phone to watch shorts or playing the PlayStation. We receive a mass amount of dopamine from these behaviors and these substances, much more than we would from these primal survival behaviors and substances like food. And so slowly but surely our brain begins to seek these mass hits of dopamine, and it reduces our natural dopamine receptors to things like exercise and things like food and things like socialization. So in terms of our hierarchy of needs, our brain is now becoming dependent on these mass dopamine hits like cocaine and alcohol, etc., like I've already explained. And so life as a normal being begins to feel joyless. We begin to feel our old lives are mundane. The exercise is mundane, the socializing is mundane, the food is mundane. But over here, the chemicals are giving us a mass reward. So we become dependent. The more that we use, the more that our body needs to achieve the same level of reward, and the chain reaction begins, and all of a sudden we find ourselves hyper dependent on certain chemicals and behavioral patterns. This is how our brain on a neurological level is being rewired to seek these rewards. And that, in a nutshell, is what addiction is, in my opinion. Now, in terms of behavior, if you were to look at any addiction treatment models or Google how to deal with addiction, often you'll see the 3 C's with regards to the behavioral side of addiction. The 3 C's being compulsion, control, and consequence, and our lack their ability of controlling these things. So compulsion, the urge, the irresistible urge to partake in these behavioral patterns that develops from dependency. Control, and the lack thereof. Our inability to control the urge to seek out these behavioral patterns. Even though we know in an innate level that these things are wrong, we still can't resist the urge. We still can't control the urge. And then the consequence. The idea that we know the financial consequences, we know the physical consequences, we know the emotional consequences, and the consequences that these behavior patterns and substances will have on our relationships, yet we still bypass because the desire is just far too strong now that we have developed these addiction problems. In my opinion, from my experience, I often find myself reminding myself that in terms of being addicted to a substance or a behavioral pattern, generally we give up everything for this one thing. Our sole focus is narrow-minded with regards to this chemical or this behavioral pattern. And I often look at through, if it was I can't remember the word, telescope, and I zoom in on this chemical. Let's say it was a pint. I zoom in on a pint of beer. Everything else around it I can't see anymore. And that's what it feels like to be addicted to something. It feels incredibly isolating. deeply saddening when you are under the influence of a substance or a behavioral pattern that you have no control over. And so if you're watching this and you are dealing with some addiction problems, trust me, I know exactly how that feels. And I will be sharing some of my story today. And if you haven't already joined the Symbiotic family, that's what we do here. We try and help one another through what it is that we're going through. And we're still in the early development stages. So come on down and join. But yeah, briefly, just to explain the history, I've already gone through it. You know, this has been going on for millions of years. We've been documented to be using psychoactive chemicals for 200,000 years now, all the way down to right now. And yeah, we've been developing some hard drugs and some difficult behavioral patterns to avoid, like TikTok, like Instagram, like YouTube that you're using right now to watch this. So it seems like a contradiction for me to be saying watch out while also trying to get people to watch my content. But the idea for me was never to become a content creator. It's just a stepping stone, and ideally everybody would have a very much balanced lifestyle with regards to using these screens. So I hope I've done a good job at briefly explaining what I feel addiction is, and the neurological rewiring, the behavioral challenges that we face, and some of the history of addiction. I could go into this in much more detail, but we'll leave it at this for now. I'm going to move my ass somewhere else. I'll go find a beautiful scene. We'll talk about the ancestral imprint that happens from our DNA and the rewiring of our brain from our ancestors rather than ourselves, and how far back that can stretch. And then I'll talk about my own experience with addiction with regards to not my childhood, but with regards to my illness, because that's what this whole series is about. We'll finish it up by giving you hopefully as much information as I can with regards to dealing with addiction whilst you're going through whatever it is that you are, or just in general. So strap in. I don't know how long this little segment has been, but generally these episodes go for maybe 30 to 45 minutes. So yeah, if you're still watching this, I love you. Thank you very much. We've done a 10-minute job on this one. So yeah, I'll see you soon. Well, this is fantastic. I'm sure I've already shown you where I am right now before I got here, but it is just incredible. It really is. Now, I recognize I'm quite far away from the camera, so you've seen it now. You've seen the tree stump that I'm on. You've seen the beautiful surroundings. I'm probably going to zoom in right now to a much more intimate sizing, and I'll be closer to the camera, but you'll see less of this beautiful stump. Not a stump, it's a fallen tree. It's still here. And it's acting as a wonderful nature chair for me to mess around on while I speak about the ancestral imprint on our DNA, on our gene expression, the epigenetic passing of DNA from our ancestors, and the intergenerational trauma. Again, these are subjects that I could speak about in a whole series on their own, and I will someday when I have time. So subscribe. But we'll synopsize it as best we can. You'll often hear that, ancestral healing. But what does that actually mean? And so we've already spoken about the history of addiction, the neurological bypassing of our reward system, the behavioral factors when it comes to addiction. And these are all related to our present life, what it is that we've been going through from childhood up until now when we're watching this video. But more often than not, what's missed is who you were born as and the gene expression that has been created from generation to generation to get you to this point, the epigenetic factors that come into play. And so if we were to look back to your parents, your grandparents, and their parents, and their parents, depending on their own addictive personalities or their dependency to certain behavior patterns or certain chemicals, those behaviors, those dependencies are then passed down through generation, which then becomes your biological expression, and you might be predisposed to an addiction issue. You might be predisposed to a certain substance or a certain behavioral pattern. And this would have been within your genetic makeup from birth. It most certainly applies to me as an Irish male. It applies to generally the whole of the mass human populace in some way, shape, or another. As Irish males, our ancestors have relied on alcohol to get ourselves through tough times, and females alike, by the way. We have, as a species, been conditioned for a very, very long time, exposed to certain chemicals like alcohol and cocaine, and nicotine and caffeine, certain behavioural patterns like watching the TV all day, every day, which has now transposed into screens, well, not screens, but phones, which is the same thing, but even more addictive, more shiny. And a lot of these things were written into our genetic expression before we even were born, which is quite interesting to think about. We also have intergenerational trauma, which is a very fancy word. So much like the genetic expression from substance use, from behavioral patterns, we also come in here with trauma, undealt with trauma. It's very important to note that your generational effects will only span roughly 7 generations. This is done by simple maths. So every time somebody is born, they're taking on 50%. Now, not 50%, but we're going to be using averages here because everybody's going to be different in terms of the genetic expression and what they take from each parent. But to round it up, let's say we take roughly 50% of the genetic expression from both sides, from mother and father. Over time, this dilutes the generational DNA that we take from both sides, and so within 7 generations, roughly we'll be taking about 0.5% to 1% of DNA from either side of a generation 7 generations ago on either side of the family, due to the dilution, because there's 2 different sides of this family, so constantly being diluted down. So we can safely say that up to about 7 generations will have affected us in the present day. And a generation is generally seen as between 25 and 30 years. So if we were to take roughly 7 generations, you'd be getting somewhere between maybe 170 to 215 or 20 years of genetic expression into your DNA, or at least a part of. Obviously, it is much more relevant to recent generations like your parents and their grandparents, but we still take in generational trauma and tendencies towards chemicals and behavioural patterns from up to 7 generations ago, which, if we do the maths, could be anywhere from, like I said, 170 to 210 years. So if I was to take myself as an example, I was born in 1993, I'm 33 years of age. If I was to round off and take 180, I would get 1813 would be 180 from 1993. And 1813 onwards, we'll say roughly, is where I'm taking my generational trauma from. where the epigenetic imprints on my DNA are coming from. And obviously getting closer to my current time here on this planet, I will have more effects. But if we were just to take 1813 till now, in Ireland we had the famine in the 1850s, which was a severely traumatic experience for everybody involved, where we had a sudden loss of much of our populace. We had a mass immigration, and we had an enormous amount of fear and pain and starvation and suffering imprinted into our species here in Ireland, which has then been imprinted the whole way down. And any of these undealt with traumas have made their way into me, into us. The same applies for the revolution in the 1900s, both world wars, the troubles in the 1970s, and the crash in 2008, and COVID, and so on and so forth. If this trauma is undealt with, if this trauma is stored within our parents, within our grandparents, and so on, it's passed down through genetics into our DNA. And so we come into this world with generational trauma, with generational behavioural patterns. And we're getting to a point now where we're developing the conscious ability to recognise that as a species, which is a beautiful thing. And so when people talk about ancestral healing, this is what they mean. For us as individuals to take on the responsibility of feeling that generational pain, of feeling that trauma, of recognising it, of recognising our familial tendencies and behavioural patterns and our generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, and dealing with that and allowing ourselves to feel it. And by doing that, you're now healing your ancestral bloodline. You're now allowing yourself to try your best to abstain from passing that on to your own children. That alongside your own trauma that you've developed throughout your life. That's what this whole series is about. And yeah, it's a fascinating concept. So you may be dealing with a lot more than just your own trauma and your own addiction. You may be dealing with hundreds of years of pain and addiction alongside of it, which is a beautiful thing to recognize. So I hope that makes sense. I've tried my best to synopsize that quickly and explain epigenetics and intergenerational trauma. But it's a beautiful thing, you know, that we have the chance to recognize that now. We have the chance to feel into our own family's pain and our own family's emotions, to talk about this with our parents, with our grandparents, and to dissect more and more information with regards to our experience here through our families and through the history of our bloodlines and our species as a whole. I don't think I have much more to say with regards to that. So I'll continue on going. I'll go to a stream now and I will speak about my own experience with addiction through illness, because it's very relative to what we're speaking about today. I'll try and synopsize it as quick as I can because I don't want you to be here all day. But this is quite an interesting episode, so hopefully you're still here watching. And yeah, then we'll finish up finding some beautiful area for me to hopefully help you as much as I can with regards to what you're dealing with, and finish it up from there. So yeah, bon voyage until now. Until then. Okay, so we find ourselves at the obligatory stream scene. I don't know if you can get my feet in, you can't. Just trust me that my feet are now in a stream. So as always with A Survivor's Guide to Survival, I will now apply my own experience to this topic. The reason I do this is to help you, the viewer, to feel seen, to feel safe within your journey, to explore, to hopefully help you to recognize that it's normal to experience addiction. Most certainly, it's normal to experience addiction even while ill, even while suffering. It's not something that we should be ashamed of. It's something that we should have compassion for, self-love and self-compassion. As I've always said, it's extremely difficult for us to navigate this world, the structures of society that we've been born into. More often than not, each and every one of us will experience addiction in one way, shape or form while we're ill. In order for us to give ourselves the best possible chance of recovering, dealing with our addictions is very important. And I can now use experience, I can now use hindsight to hopefully help you, because I didn't have me when I was suffering. I didn't have this series while I was suffering. I didn't have the intellect and the experience and the wisdom that I have now. I was young and I was naive. I traveled to Canada where I became ill. I started suffering with a brain tumour. It was undiagnosed for 6 months, and within those 6 months I experienced horrific symptoms and a horrific experience in general. I've gone over that multiple times throughout my channel and series, so you can go back and you can look at those videos if you'd like. There's plenty of brain tumour videos. But whilst this was all beginning, I was dependent on various chemicals. I grew up as a teen in Ireland drinking far too much, taking far too many drugs into my latter teen years, into my early 20s, using nicotine, using caffeine on a daily basis, smoking marijuana unhealthily for a long time. I brought all of these behavioural patterns into my illness. So when things started to go wrong in Canada, I would use these chemicals and behavioural patterns as a means of distracting myself from my own pain, which more often than not we do anyway. Earlier we spoke about what's actually happening in terms of the neurological rewiring of the brain and the behavioural rewiring, but we didn't touch on the soothing of pain, the distraction from pain, from all of this trauma that we've been speaking about. More often than not, that's why we use these chemicals. And that's why I used these chemicals. So when I was in Canada, I was working as a tradesman doing a stonemasonry, and I was horrifically ill. I would drink every day after my work shift. I would drink on the weekends. I didn't know I had a brain tumour, by the way. So I didn't know what was wrong with me, and the fear of that was causing me to need to distract myself more and more. I was using far too much alcohol. I wasn't using marijuana at the time because it was enhancing my fear and enhancing my pain all over my body, which is actually a medicine, and it was showing me what was wrong, but I wasn't able to handle that. So I chose alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, cocaine, MDMA, pretty much anything I could use that would help me to distract myself. I would watch screens. I'd be watching YouTube videos and Instagrams and all that kind of stuff from morning till nighttime. Even in work, I would listen to podcasts to distract myself. These behaviors continued. I then came home from Canada. I was diagnosed eventually with a brain tumour. And even at that point, when I knew I was dying, when I knew I needed myself to cease certain chemical relationships, certain behavioural patterns, I still struggled. And I held a lot of shame for a long time with regards to that. The fact that I was dying and still at times was drinking alcohol and using cocaine and smoking. This went on for months after I got home. But eventually I would force myself to cease my relationship with nicotine, with alcohol, with cocaine. And I would substitute them with healthier alternatives like swimming and walking and meditation and breath work and writing. And I would play poker to try and have some sort of consistency within my life while I was suffering in my room. And I would watch some shows and I would eat some shit food here and there. But I never isolated the pain behind these patterns, behind these chemicals. I just ceased the addictions out of fear that they would end my life sooner. And so I essentially transposed these addictions into various other behavioral patterns, but never dealt with any of the trauma and never dealt with any of the pain, or at least a lot of it. I didn't do any crying while I was ill. I had the strong boy mentality, and this is me speaking about my illness, so I don't have to go into post-surgery, but just so you know, I did wean myself back onto a lot of these chemicals and behavioral patterns after my surgery, and I'm still dealing with certain behavioral patterns now, certain chemicals now. I'm in and out, but I've done a hell of a lot of work on, hell is not the right choice of words there, I've done a beautiful amount of work. Sometimes it felt like hell with regards to identifying and sourcing the wealth of pain that exists within me, that did before my surgery, that most certainly did after my tumour and after my surgery. And you know, one thing I'll say about dealing with addiction is that it's lifelong, you know, it's a long process, and we need to have a lot of patience and we need to have a lot of compassion. Like I said, it's very difficult to navigate this world. We live within a society that doesn't serve us as humans, or at least the vast majority of us. It's incredibly difficult to have to work to keep yourself fed, most likely in a job that you don't feel rewarded by. And feeling that constant pressure of bills and rent and food, and perhaps you have a family and feeding your family and so on and so forth. And so for one to want to distract themselves from all of this pressure by using various chemicals or behavioral patterns would seem relatively normal, because it is very difficult to handle. But there is also many ways for us to replace these behavioral patterns and these chemicals with healthier alternatives. There is many ways to the top of a mountain. There's many ways for us to heal. And so, yeah, let's get into that. I'll take you somewhere else right now, and I'll give you as much information as I can in a short snippet with regards to the healing aspect of your addictions, and hopefully some valuable information with regards to that. And as always, you know, I'm skimming over a lot of these topics, but if you have any questions with regards to what I'm speaking about, whether that's addiction in general, whether that's my story, or anything that you want to know with regards to me now, let me know in the comment section. And you can always direct message me on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or YouTube, email, whatever, and I'll be always there to answer. So yeah, I hope this was helpful in terms of helping you to feel normal. We're all in this together, you know. That's what symbiotic vibration is all about. So feel free to communicate and socialize within this platform, and please do subscribe and help me build this wonderful platform even more. I love it. it's really become a purpose of mine. So yeah, I'm just rambling now. Let's finish this episode up by helping you. Wow. Okay, so just to give you a little look at my little chair here, we have what looks to be some stone structure. I don't know why it's here. More stone down here, so perhaps some sort of old wall maybe. Although I don't see any more. You know what, I do. That's quite interesting. Because I know I've seen some old walls across the stream here, so obviously there was some form of society living around this beautiful woods, maybe a couple of 100 years ago or so. And so, just like the tree, the fallen tree, I'm pretty far away from the camera, I just wanted to show you that there's a lovely tree behind me and this beautiful kind of a stone, mossy seat that I find myself on. And at this point, I will zoom in. So yeah, we've been through it, eh? We've been through it. We've spoken about the rewiring of the reward system, the chronic dysfunction of our brains with regards to the dopamine receptors. We've gone into the neurological, the behavioural, the ancestral, my experience. And yeah, let's talk about you now. And let's talk about dealing with addiction. Let's talk about dealing with your illness, whatever it is that you're going through, and perhaps addiction is something that you need to isolate with regards to your healing journey. If you are here and you're merely dealing with addiction itself, then I hope that this episode is still relatable and still somewhat helpful to you. And trust me when I say that I've been there and I remain there. In terms of dealing with the addiction itself, I think, as I said in my last segment, removing the shame is extremely important. Often we feel ashamed of ourselves for having addictive personalities or addictive disorders, wherein we find ourselves bound to certain chemicals or certain behavioural patterns. But it's so difficult to navigate these planes, to navigate the structure of society that we live in, and we need to find a deep amount of self-compassion for how we are navigating this difficult realm. We need to feel the shame in order to release it. This is extremely important. We need to speak about the shame to our loved ones, to our friends, to professionals. And this is a great starting point to allow ourselves to feel compassionate about what we're going through rather than feeling ashamed of it, because the shame itself will push us towards using whatever behavioural pattern that we have even more to try and distract ourselves from the shame itself or the guilt that we are feeling. And so, as I always say, we're trying to feel the shame, to feel the guilt, to feel the resentment, all of the negative emotions in order to release them. We're trying to speak about them in order to release them. If we hold on to them, they'll only cause further pain and further damage and further distraction. So we deal with the shame. We find the self-compassion. We ask for help. As I said at the very beginning, we're pack animals. We're designed to work together. More often than not, when we are addicted to a substance or a behavioural pattern, we will isolate, as I said in the beginning, because our reward system no longer is rewarding socialization. It's not giving us enough dopamine, so we'll find it somewhere else. And thus we feel so isolated, and we don't ask for help. And so it's very important for you to recognize that we all need help. We all need support. Whether that's you asking a loved one for help, or a friend for help, or a professional counselor or therapist for help, or somebody in Symbiotic Vibration's beautiful community for help or support along the way, or me. It's a beautiful thing to alleviate the control that you have over everything and to ask for help. Whether that be the 12-step program in an addiction treatment facility, or that's with a dedicated addiction counsellor, or that's with a psychotherapist, or that's with a friend, or it's with a family member. It's a beautiful thing to have support, and don't be ashamed to ask for said help. Like I said, once we remove the shame, we can then find it easier to connect to people and to ask for support and share the journey with others. That's what Symbiotic Vibration is all about. To feel your existence. I've said this in every episode, but it's vitally important for us. Like I said, more often than not, we're using these chemicals and these behavioural patterns to soothe pain, to deviate from feeling the pain that we have experienced throughout our lives, sometimes the pain that has been passed down to us generationally, intergenerationally, through our DNA expression. So it's extremely important for us to allow ourselves to feel our emotions, which is quite difficult in the beginning, and even throughout life. It's easier to watch a screen, or to drink a pint, or to eat crisps, or whatever it is that you're doing, to sit down and feel your emotions. It's hard to feel sad. It's hard to lean into feeling the pain that you're in, that you have been for a long, long time. But until we can isolate the pain, until we can feel into our emotions and everything that's been stored within us since our childhood, we will seek external devices to cover up that pain. And so a massive part of the journey of healing addiction is to allow yourself to feel what it is that you're abstaining from feeling by using these substances and using these chemicals. And it's not an easy thing to do. That's why support is vital. We don't have to do this alone. Some of it we will, no doubt, but not all of it. And that's why support is so important. And the beautiful thing about the human brain, like I said, it's been rewired. Our dopamine reward system has been rewired. We have chronic dysfunction. But there's a term, neuroplasticity, basically meaning that our brain is constantly adapting to our environment, and it's constantly developing new brain cells. So we have the ability to reverse rewire our brain. The hard part about that is, in the beginning, we will experience heavy amounts of depression, depending on what it is that we are now walking away from, whether that be an addictive substance or a behavioural pattern. Our brain is wired to achieve excessive hits of dopamine. So when we begin to slowly but surely remove certain patterns from our existence, our brain is going to feel very, very low in dopamine, because it's not getting the same reward from simple mechanisms like food or exercise or socialization. So that's where the depression kicks in. it's very important for us to recognize that what's happening is our brain is beginning to rewire itself back to a primal reward system, if you will, wherein you do achieve a dopamine reward from simple things like exercise and food and meditation and breath work and socializing and sex or whatever it may be. Or just sitting outside amongst nature. It's the most rewarding feeling. So it's very important for us to recognize that this is what's happening when we are seizing a behavioral pattern or a chemical that is quite difficult for us. So give yourself patience and give yourself time and give yourself plenty of space with regards to allowing yourself to rewire your own brain. I think it's very important for us to also recognize that while we're feeling our existence, we're now rewiring our brain to replace these behavioral patterns and these chemicals with healthier alternatives. Nature. I say it in every episode and I will continue to, but simply sitting outside in a wooded forest like this, or a stream or a park, somewhere tranquil, will in itself elevate your dopamine levels. It will release oxytocin into your system, serotonin, and it will ground you and make you feel relaxed. Breathing and meditating especially, is so good for rewiring the brain, for allowing ourselves to develop healthier networks and develop much more healthy brain cells. So yeah, exercise is up there on number one. A clean and healthy diet. Sleep is so important. Socializing is very important. Our environment is so important. So if you surround yourself with people who engage in the behaviors that you're trying to abstain from, more often than not, you're going to end up back in the cycle. So when we make dramatic changes, like ceasing certain addictions, sometimes that forces us to make dramatic changes within our environment, within our social network. Don't be afraid of that. It's okay to change, it's okay to be yourself, and it's okay to find new environments and new people to explore. People that might benefit your future, that might have similar paths that they are walking, healthier paths that will alleviate the stresses of life going forward. So yeah, it's important for us to not only cease our addictions, but also to replace them with healthier behavioral patterns and healthier environments. Seeing the sun come out for the first time today, and it is absolutely mesmerizing, and it has taken me completely off course. But yeah, I think I've said all I need to say. In terms of healing your addictions, you have to be extremely patient. You have to recognize that potentially this is going to be a lifelong endeavor. That's not to say that it's always going to be this difficult or this painful, but these patterns are deeply ingrained within our biological makeup as human beings. These dopamine reward systems are innately built into us. And so we're always going to be dealing with addiction in some way, shape or another. Most certainly because of the current layout of our society and just how much shiny temptation there is within it. And so having the support around you is vital. Changing your environment, changing your behavioral patterns, accepting that you want to feel your emotions and your existence. Perhaps seeing some therapists, some alternate healers. Perhaps you want to dive into the role of psychedelics. If you are going to do something like that, make sure you do so under the professional guidance of somebody who is intimately connected to those beautiful medicines. Yeah, I don't have to say much more. If you have any more questions, please do feel free to ask me. But yeah, I think that's about it. If I do remember anything else, I'll come back and I'll speak again, but I'm just going to butt in right here because I have forgotten one thing. While I was staring at the sun over there, I did realise I forgot to mention that relapse doesn't end your progress. If you think about it as a road, a relapse is just a speed bump. It doesn't mean that everything is capitulated and everything is over. You might feel some shame and you might feel some guilt, but you're not starting from the start again. You're just taking a small speed bump, and all of the information and experience that has been happening before your relapse is still there. You might feel a little bit chemically imbalanced for a little bit of time, but it's not going to be as bad as it was the first time. It just means that there is more temptation. It means you made a little mistake, but you have some compassion for yourself if this does happen, because it's normal. It's very, very difficult, as I said already. So yeah, it's important for you to recognize that if you do relapse into a behavioral pattern or a chemical, that it's not over for you. Life is not over, and your progress hasn't erased itself. You're just entering a little speed bump, and you will be back on track as soon as possible. So yeah, let's leave it at that for now. Thank you all for being here. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you've taken something from it with regards to what addiction is and how you may deal with that with regards to your own illness and where it is that you're going. I love you all, and yeah, thanks for being here. I'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.